My father loved dance so much that it colored his fantasies. I think if he imagined himself born into a different time, place, or family, he saw a life that could have allowed him to become a professional ballet dancer. I remember my father and my grandmother gliding across the floor in a Hungarian waltz on Sunday afternoons. And when he took my brother and me for bike rides in Central Park, he would stop at a group of folk dancers who gathered each week by the side of Turtle Pond. He played on the rocks above the filmy water as he joined the circle of dancers. Sweat broke out across his face and darkened his t-shirt as his arms rose and fell in time to the music. He was both concentrating and losing himself as he spun. In those moments, he seemed joyously content and free. We all have to deal with grief at some point in our lives, and for some it's easier to deal with and harder for others. Some try to push away their grief, but it never truly goes away. Instead, we just need to learn to live with it. In Michael Lemberger's Dancing with My Father, the main character learns how to live with grief after the loss of a loved one. Dancing with My Father by Michael Lemberger. I remember it was an overcast Saturday morning. My parents and I were traveling from New York to Vermont. There was this little bakery my parents liked to visit with what they called the most succulent old world pastries in the country. As my mother was reading the paper and I slept in the back, my father lost consciousness behind the wheel. The car veered across the empty highway, crashed into the rock face that lined the road, and ricocheted back, coming to a stop. By then, the shock of the impact had traveled up the length of my body. My mother, in a state of shock, scrambled out of the wreckage to flag down a passing truck. My father was dead. Paramedics pulled me from the car, and I was rushed to the hospital. I had a shattered femur, a broken hip socket, shredded knee ligaments, a broken vertebrae, and a concussion. 2 surgical teams sliced me open. One sopped up the blood that had pooled inside my abdomen, the other inside titanium rod along the length of my thigh bone. My father was pronounced dead at the scene. I stayed in the hospital in Vermont, furiously trying to push away my grief. Despite a steady stream of visitors, I was alone much of the time. I furiously tried pushing away my grief. I told myself I would take care of my body's brokenness and then the loss of my father later. It didn't work that way. Within days, I was coming apart, crying into my starched pillowcase, relying on the comfort of the nurses and the woman in the next bed. My father was the greatest person I had ever known. He had taught me how to draw and how to look at the enormous gray buildings and see beauty there. We had talked about books and boys and how to remain good in a hard world. And we shared more than that. I inherited his face. The likeness was extraordinary. That likeness was all that I had left. The next few years were dense with surgeries and physical therapy. My body was filled with metal hardware one year and removed the next. I progressed from wheelchair to a walker, to crutches, to cane, to finally on my own 2 feet. I never regained my equilibrium. The surgery that had saved me also left one leg half an inch shorter than the other. I was permanently unbalanced. Though I had inherited so much from my father, I did not get his feet. The notion of dancing had never occurred to me. I was such a self-conscious kid, I couldn't imagine moving so freely in front of other people. Even as a child, I was more drawn to the dress-up potential of pink tutus than to dance itself. But for all it took for me, the accident cured me of my unease. There were only so many times that I could be poked and prodded by doctors, nurses, and physical therapists before I stopped caring who was looking. Years later, on an overcast Saturday that made me ache for my father, I found an adult beginner ballet class for myself. I had no expectations. For so long, it would have been impossible for me to try at all. Just being there felt like an accomplishment. In class, I tottered unevenly across the floor. I did my best, and I even found moments to relish. I was rising up the balls of my feet and stretching towards the ceiling. Still, I was a pretty terrible dancer. In fact, I still am. No amount of time or practice will give me any real mastery. Ballet, I've learned, never gets easy. It's all about the illusion of the effortlessness. Even the pros bloody their feet to perfect a certain line to a leg or propulsion of a leap. The illusion lies in us, the spectators. We never inhabit the dancers' bodies or feel the control they must exert to articulate their movements. In this, ballet is like grief. We expect to see mourners in pain immediately after the death of a loved one. After that, grief becomes invisible. Others can't see it, but it never goes away. Instead, you learn to live with it, to move through your days and years of accommodating this new reality. The true tragedy of losing someone you love unfolds over time. There's the loss itself, the empty space that used to be filled by that person, his voice, the sound of his footfalls on the kitchen tile, the face you inherit from him looking back at you in the mirror. And then there's the fact that the sorrow you feel changes you. So much that you are no longer the person he once knew. My father's death set in motion a series of changes in me, such that I wonder whether he would recognize the person I've become. As the years pass, he feels more and more lost to me. He died too soon to experience many important moments in my life. He wasn't there when I graduated from high school. He will never walk me down the aisle or meet his grandkids. And he missed out on seeing me overcome the tragedies from that horrific day. He never knew my true strength. When I walked into the dance studio for the first time, I had no idea my father's ghost was coming with me. His dream of dancing was never mine. I didn't love dance as he did. I live in a body that's permanently weakened and scarred, but in the studio, moving red-faced and awkward, I can return, however briefly, to those moments of him, joyously content and free, because there it is in the mirror. I see his face, dancing.